All right, so today we're diving into a novel that's famously tough, but wow, is it powerful? Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure. We're going to break down why this book, which completely scandalized readers over 100 years ago, still feels so incredibly relevant. Okay, let's start right there with that one word, uncomfortable. It's such a raw and honest reaction, and honestly, it's the perfect place to begin. Because Hardy's final novel, it wasn't made to be comfortable. Nope. It was designed to make you think, to really challenge you, and to shine a light on some pretty harsh truths. So, what is it that makes it so unsettling? Well, for starters, the book is just notoriously bleak. Hardy packs these pages with shattered dreams, raw emotion, and a tragedy so shocking it caused a huge public outcry. This is not a story that's going to offer you any easy answers. It's a novel that absolutely does not pull its punches. And this gets right to the heart of what we're talking about today. See, Hardy wasn't just interested in tragedy for its own sake. He was hiding this profound message deep inside the story's darkest moments. That feeling of discomfort you get, it's completely intentional. It's basically a clue pointing us toward what the novel is really about. And get this, Hardy gives us two keys right at the very beginning to help us unlock his critique of society. And these aren't just some fancy decorative quotes, they are the literal framework for the entire story. So let's start with the first one. Our first key is a phrase that Hardy borrows directly from the Bible, from Corinthians actually. He takes this ancient piece of wisdom and just applies it like a laser to the rigid, rule-obsessed society of his time. The letter killeth. Now, the full quote is, "The letter killeth, but the spirit giveth life." What it's saying is that rigid, unfeeling laws, that's the letter, are totally meaningless. And they can even be destructive if you don't have the spirit of compassion, understanding, and love. And this right here, this lays out the central conflict of the entire novel. On one side, you have the letter, all the stiff laws, the social dogma, the written rules that define Jude's world. And on the other side, you've got the spirit, his natural ambition, his desires, his incredible capacity for love. Jude's story is really the story of this tragic collision. And you can see this collision playing out in every single part of Jude's life. His passion for learning, that's his spirit, is blocked by a university system that cares more about his social class than his actual talent. His desire for love gets him trapped by these inflexible marriage laws. Even his search for faith gets smothered by a religious doctrine that just give him rules instead of comfort. You see? At every turn, the letter of society is there to crush his human spirit. And this is exactly why the novel still hits so hard. This isn't just a critique of Victorian England. Think about our own world, right? Educational systems that sometimes value test scores over real curiosity, or giant bureaucracies that forget about the actual people they're supposed to be serving. Hardy's warning about the lever killing the spirit, yeah, it's just as relevant now as it was back in 1895. Okay, so let's move on to that second key. And this one's a lot trickier. At first glance, it seems really problematic, maybe even misogynistic. But Hardy is doing something way more clever than you might think. So the quote is from the book of Esdras, and it's this very stark warning about men being destroyed by their desire for women. And this was a pretty common idea back in the Victorian era. The dangerous temptress who leads men to their downfall. This is the obvious question, isn't it? Is this whole tragedy just the fault of the women in Jude's life, Arabella and Sue? If you take the quote at face value, it sure seems that way. But that's only the surface level reading. And this is where Hardy plays his cards. He isn't actually endorsing this misogynistic idea. He's using it ironically to expose the deep hypocrisy of his society. He's holding up a common prejudice of his time just to show everyone how flawed and destructive it really is. So here you can see the two ways to look at this. You've got the surface reading, the shallow interpretation, which is just a simple warning against women. But the deeper meaning, the one Hardy actually intended, is this incredibly powerful critique of a culture that takes something as natural as desire and twists it into a weapon of guilt and shame. So how does this actually happen? Well, it's a tragic cycle. It all starts with a natural human impulse, like love, but then society slaps a label on it, calls it sinful, and that desire gets all tangled up with guilt and judgment until finally it turns inward and becomes self-destructive. In Hindu mythology, there's this figure called Bhasmasur, who is given the power to turn anyone into ash, but was tricked into turning that power on himself. In that same way, Jude isn't destroyed by love itself, but by a love that society has forced him to turn against himself. So, with these two keys, the letter crushing the spirit and desire turned self-destructive by guilt, we can start to see the novel in a totally new light. It stops being just a bleak social critique, it's actually a surprisingly modern work of philosophy. Critics back then called the book immoral and pessimistic because of its devastating ending. But what if Hardy wasn't a pessimist? What if he was a prophet? What if he was seeing the kind of existential struggles that would come to define the 20th century, way before the philosophers who made them famous? I mean, just look at this. Jude's struggle feels so modern when you put it next to the great existential thinkers. Like a character out of Kierkegaard, he's desperately searching for meaning, but just keeps hitting walls of despair. Like Camus' Sisyphus, he keeps pushing forward in a universe that seems totally indifferent to him. And like Sartre's characters, his very attempts to find freedom only seem to trap him more. He was an existential hero before that was even a thing. Ultimately, this isn't just a story about a stonemason in Victorian England. Hardy is writing about the human condition itself, that universal search we all have for belonging, for meaning, and for love, in a world that often seems determined to deny us all three. Okay, so let's bring it all together now. After unlocking these themes, we can finally go back and answer that first question. Why on earth should anyone read this deeply uncomfortable book today? And the answer is because the novel is a mirror. Hardy holds up Jude's struggle and forces us to confront some difficult truths, not just about his world, but about our own, about the rules we live by, the judgments we make, and the institutions we put our trust in. Using our two keys, we've really unlocked the novel's core messages. There's the warning against rigid systems that have no heart. There's the critique of a culture that demonizes natural desire. And most important of all, there's the recognition that Jude's tragedy is really a reflection of our own timeless human struggle. So in the end, this book isn't really about Jude's personal failure. It's about the ongoing fight to live an authentic life with both spirit and desire in a world that so often tries to crush them. Hardy was brave enough to write truths his own society wasn't ready to hear, and in so many ways they're truths we are still grappling with today. And that brings us to the final, really challenging question that the book leaves us with. When you look into that mirror that Hardy is holding up, what parts of our own world and our own lives do you see reflected in Jude's struggle? It's a powerful question, and it's the reason this novel, for all its discomfort, remains an absolute masterpiece.